All right, hi everyone. I'm Nick Paltridge from Mallee Sustainable Farming, and we're joined today by Dr Jason Emms. Jason's most recent role was with the GRDC, but before that he worked for the Enrich project, which focused on new forage shrubs for Mallee-type environments. This talk is one of several events being run in our Mallee CMA-funded forage shrubs project. It's really to provide a broad overview of diverse shrub plantings, some of the general principles of grazing them, and it's online. Because a lot of our farmers are spread across a large area, we know you can't get to all the face-to-face events, so we wanted to deliver some online content too, which will be recorded and viewed over time. Just before we begin, we want to acknowledge the support of the Mallee Catchment Management Authority in this work, with funding from the Australian Government's Future Drought Fund. And we also need a disclaimer. Although the info we're going to get from Jason is going to be spot on, it's also general in nature, and you do need to get your own advice tailored to your specific situation rather than rely wholly on what you hear from us today. We've got a few online, so we'll get underway. Jason, I gather the talk goes for about 20 minutes.
Yeah, about that. Nick, a bit of time for questions as well.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to ask questions, please drop them into the chat, and I'll either interrupt Jason or wait until the end and ask the questions then, but we're going to keep it pretty casual and conversational. So, yeah, if you want to share your screen, Jason, and take it away.
No worries. Thanks, Nick. And yes, most of this will be spot on, I'm sure. Really like to, start off with just acknowledging Dean Revell, who contributed a lot of the information I'm presenting today, but a host of other people as well, researchers, and a lot of farmers that's been involved in the journey. Really, really important. Really want to start off by just really highlighting the value of pastures in this system. So while we're talking about forage shrubs, and probably in the invite you got, really want to double down and stress around the importance of shrub pasture mixes, and they can be dry pastures in that photo today. So we're all familiar with this type of scenario. We've got annual pasture production, which varies over time, driven by the season. I mean, it's pretty easy. But when you look at a shrub and pasture system, so that's, those bars there where you've got blue and red. So blue bar is the shrub edible biomass, and then the pasture edible biomass on top of that. What you can see straight away in that combination system, you get increased total production. So there's more feed being produced with those couple of components. But if we just look at the blue bars there, the other thing that stands out is just how stable that feed supply is. So you get increased stability through adding the shrub component, and that edible biomass doesn't go up and down with the season as much as your annual pasture. So it's really good from a feed budgeting point of view and risk management. So they're really complementary, shrubs and pasture. And so you see, we've got lots and lots of examples over many years where you've got great pasture production right up to the base of the shrub. So you're not losing area. It's not like a mallee tree where you see that big competition zone. You get really, really great pasture production. And in certain circumstances, especially with something like annual medics, you've got increased phosphorus and potassium in that pasture growing around the shrubs. Just come about through that deeper rooted nature of the shrubs and nutrient recycling.
Yeah, I really like the look of that one on the bottom right with the medic in there. But I suppose you're going to tell me that may not be the most balanced mix.
No, absolutely. From a animal's point of view, that does look great from a human perspective, and especially agronomists, because that's what we like to produce. But that is just an overload of protein from an animal's point of view. Yeah, that's right. Shrubs play a really big part in terms of microclimate effects. Just an example here of a false break where you get germination just on the south side of a shrub row, just with that extra moisture being retained, but no germ anywhere else. And similar at the other side of the other end of the season, you get pasture staying greener for longer in the shrubs. just less evaporation, transpiration. But you don't always see that type of nice situation in reality.
Yeah.
This is a very common situation where you've got no pasture at all. Good shrub biomass there. This is a rhagodia plant, but no shrubs at all. No pasture at all, sorry. Another example with old man saltbush, we just got wall-to-wall old man saltbush and nothing else on the ground. And then so that creates this type of scenario where you've got a supplementary feed and you've got sheep bloody jumping over each other to get some hay in this example, because that to an animal is just a paddock full of salt basically. So a mix of forage plants, and that can be shrubs, pasture, maybe forage crops, is the best way to try and provide livestock with the complete suite of nutrients and minerals that they need. So just like you would formulate a ration, for example, you wouldn't just have a ration comprised of one thing. And so designing a forage mix is similar in principle. So this is an extreme example, but just to compare something like this to some of those other photos, and from those sheep's perspective in that photo, just the mix of different plants and think about what those plants are bringing to the diet of those animals, a whole range of different minerals and nutrients. So a forage mix allows animals to counter certain things that limit intake. So let's be honest here, the forage shrubs we're talking about, things like old man saltbush, or rhagodia, or some wattle species, or even Tagesasti, they're not great feeds on their own. Right? They have a lot of factors which limit animal intake and animal nutrition. Old man saltbush has obviously got a lot of salt, and so animals can only eat so much salt. So they might not be full, they could actually eat more, but they have to stop because they're just full of salt in that example. But if they've got other forages on offer that they can eat that don't have that salt component, they can eat more. And so you get increased total intake with forage mixes and therefore potential for actual animal growth. It also opens up an opportunity in a way of thinking that one plant species doesn't have to do everything. And I think that's how we've thought in pasture science and forage science. So you need one plant to deliver, protein, energy. It's got to be drought tolerant. It's got to be disease resistant, and so forth. And that's really hard to find plants that can do that. So thinking about it in this way, plants don't have to be a silver bullet, and that's good because honestly they aren't, especially from a animal nutrition point of view. And so you can come up with a good diet and a productive system for the livestock through a mix of plants. So like a team approach, basically. So, as Nick mentioned at the start, there was a project called Enrich, which really systematically evaluated a whole range of native Australian species, tree and shrub species, and looked at their potential as forage plants. So over 100 different species we looked at. We grew them over many sites, many years, grazed them many times, basically. And for the Mallee environment, we came up with really good mixes, shrub mixes, for 5 different soil / environments. And really, selecting forage shrub species really just depends on simple stuff like salinity, waterlogging, and texture. And we developed up a decision tree to guide people through that and how you design an actual mix of species. And that can be seen in a native forage shrub guide, which is available from the Mallee CMA, and I'm sure, Nick, you'll be able to put the link
Yes.
as well for that. But that's a really great booklet. So it'll guide you through all these things really easily. This is just an example here of a few different environments and what type of different shrub species you can plant in that. So there are opportunities to increase the diversity of these shrub pasture systems. However, growing mixtures does have its challenges. Obviously, we've seen that in some of those first slides. Here's another good example. So at Walpy up, where you've seen sheep here have really displayed their preference. All right, there's not much pasture left. They've obviously preferred the Rhagodia at the front and left Old Man Saltbush at the back. But I really want to warn people that preference is not fixed. So I could show many other examples where the opposite happens, and they would have
So
been
if the
bred
animals
men.
are trained to like the saltbush, then they'll take that in as well, will they?
Yeah, so experience, and we'll talk on that, has a massive factor, Nick, and it's probably more important than soil type, for example. Soil type can have a slightly important impact in terms of what's actually in the plants, but yeah, livestock experience is absolutely critical. And so, how do you get the most out of this system? You've got to pay attention to grazing management. I think one of the most important ways is just stocking density and really having high stocking rates. So we're talking 30 DSC a hectare plus,
Yep.
and really trying to get good full utilisation of both the shrubs and the pasture, but obviously leave ground cover as well. And that encourages diet diversity, just that extra competition between animals. If you graze at, the old, one sheep an acre type thing, sheep will just run around and do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And they'll just pick the eyes out of it. So they'll just pick the cashews out the trail mix and leave the sunflower seeds. And we don't want that
Yeah.
in this example. So stocking density is really important. As you've said, Nick, experience is absolutely critical. And so past experience really plays a big part in what animals decide to eat and what they don't. And that can be negative experiences in the past and positive. And so some of those photos early, those animals that just had Old Man Saltbush only to eat, they're probably going to have a negative experience in a way. But you can create positive experience as well. That starts really early. It starts in the womb, or it starts at foot, like this photos shows. But you can get experience and learning into older animals. But I think an important thing to remember is there is a bit of time for that. So there's a learning time, and there's also an adaptation time. So livestock, think about their guts. The rumen is full of microbes, and it's very dynamic environment in there.
Yeah.
And those bugs and microbes change over time. And when you move from, let's say, grazing stubbles onto grazing a shrub pasture mix, about this time of year, it is quite different for the animals. And so their guts take time to adapt. So how do you get experience into animals? What we've seen is one of the most effective ways is just give them a few what we call lessons, if you like. And so if you think about introduce them into little cells, and they only need sort of 3 to 4 lessons or exposure to those new plants or the shrub pasture mix to change their behaviour. And temporary fencing obviously can be effective with that. So just to explain that a little bit more, basically you've just got, it's almost like cell grazing, if you like, and you just move those animals 3 to 4 times into a fresh cell or a fresh patch. But don't force them to eat everything necessarily, because that's going to end up in a negative experience. But just moving them like every week, 3 to 4 times, and you'll see their grazing behaviour change enormously.
So you're not taking them out of the shrubs during this process. You're just shifting them from one cell within the planting to another, are you?
Yeah, and that seemed to be very effective in the work we did. And that's why, if you've got small paddocks or, temporary electric fencing really works well to do that. And this, we'll pick up, some of those points in this example here, which is just shows live weight of young sheep over autumn. So we had a control mob, and that's shown in the red. So that's just grazing dry pasture this time of year and grain, supplemented with grain, and that grain increased over time as your pasture ran out, and that just maintained weight. In the blue line, we had a shrub pasture system, absolutely no supplementary feeding and grain at all. But you see that dip in live weight in the first week. And that's sort of that learning adaptation time. But if you sort of hold your ground a little bit and allow those animals to learn and work through that, basically we've got an increase in live weight, in autumn, which is pretty impressive. No supplementary feeding, around 200 grams a head per day.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, at this time of year. So there's a lot of potential there, but you've got to do a few things right to get that. Let's be honest there. And so you can get a totally different situation to some of those photos I showed earlier. So this is, on a farm, and this isn't a research plot. You've got great utilization of old man saltbush in this particular example, and fantastic ground cover left. And that's really what you want. In this example, we're talking about really experienced animals that have been on that farm, a long time and have been used to shrubs from early on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the holy grail. That looks great.
Yeah, fantastic utilization, great ground
You know
cover.
where that shot was taken?
Yeah, that's at Narromine, so in New South Wales.
Yep.
Yeah. This is a different example. So these are naive sheep. These sheep came up from, the southeast, around Kingston up to near Murray Bridge. Totally naive animals.
Very
and
fat.
Yeah, good white suffix. And they moved about 3 times. So this is in the third move, just into a new cell. So after about 3.5 weeks or so.
Yeah.
And you can see that there's 3 different shrub species there. It's hard to see because they've been well grazed, but there's different shrub species there, and there's good ground cover. So they haven't just picked the eyes out of one or just eaten all the dry pasture. So that's another good example with, pretty naive animals, I'd call. From a plant point of view, though, really important to remember shrubs are not pastures in this regard, and they do take a long time to recover. So, at least 6 months depending on environment and rainfall. They can handle really severe grazing. Like that's great utilization of this shrub here. That's the exact same plant 12 months later. So
Wow.
they can regrow, but you need to protect regrowth. Can't stress that enough.
Yeah.
Regrowth is really, really important. And I think where people run into trouble, especially with diverse mixes, you set stock them and for a long period, and then animals just keep going back to that regrowth.
Yeah.
Especially if some species are a little bit more palatable, easier on the tongue, and they just keep hammering those, and that can lead to plant death. So you need to, allow them a recovery time. Regular grazing, though, is important. So, you go to the trouble of put these things in and the costs, then you got to use it or get rid of it. This is just an example of old man saltbush where the green bar is where it's not grazed at all over a few years, and it just keeps getting taller. So this living haystack concept that you hear sometimes is rubbish. You've got to use it as part of your farm feed base. Otherwise, you're just going to create another problem. You see that a lot with old man saltbush, 2-metre old man saltbush that's out of the reach of sheep.
Yeah.
So you got to use it at least once a year. Right, so sort of summing up a few things together, I suppose, I think it's really important to start by thinking about what you're in this for. Is it to fill feed gaps? Is it making use of land that's not profitable to crop, and that's where shrubs have a massive impact, or fixing a mallee seep, for example? And I think you know, we're working through that with Mallee Sustainable Farming at the moment to put something together that'll help you work through those situations, because once you know that, it dictates how you plant and where you're going to plant these things.
Yes.
Because there's no right way to design a shrub planting. You've got two sort of ways to do it, I suppose, alley or a block. So alley, you've got 2 or 3 rows of shrubs, then an alley of usually pasture, but it might be crop, then another 2 or 3 rows of shrubs and so forth. Allows you flexibility in that alley. Like, there's a few different things you could do there, but it's really hard to get good grazing utilisation and
Yes.
use of all those plants, because if you just stock that, they're just going to eat that alley, for example, and they might nibble a bit of the shrub. And so you're not getting the most out of that system unless you put that grazing management techniques into use.
On that alley there, so just to reiterate, there's a lot of pasture, not a lot of shrub. It may be hard to train them to eat the shrub in a situation like that. But if you cell graze it and put up some temporary fencing, do you think you'd have a better chance?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Because you can get that high stocking density that way. So just by doing that.
But in that alley, you can drive a tractor down there and sow a pasture, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's the advantage with the alley. It allows you some flexibility into the future. If you want to plant a forage crop in there, yeah, you can do that, or you can renovate your pasture, maybe some hay or whatever. So that's why people are attracted to the alley design. Yeah.
Yes.
The block planting down below is high density of shrubs. Really great for small paddocks and small areas. Great place to put animals out of bad weather. I think a good way to start if you don't have experience in this, area. Right, just starting to wind up in terms of expectations. Yeah, look, you've got to think about opportunity cost of taking land out to put in these systems, and that's, I think, if you really target your unprofitable cropping land, that's where it makes most sense. It is a big capital investment. Preparation is key. So weed control, especially the year before, absolutely critical. Forage shrubs are usually planted by seedlings, so you've got to go and source those.
Yes.
And usually get a contractor to plant them. So there's a cost. So maybe $500 a hectare plus for establishment. And you've got to think you're not going to graze that paddock or that area for a while. You need those shrubs time to grow. So maybe a year, maybe 2 years. But if you're targeting, land that's unproductive, that opportunity cost is less.
Yes.
What are you going to get? I think reduced supplementary feed costs are the big one. Obviously, you might still have to supplement, but at a lower level. So there's obviously savings there, especially at times like now, autumn feed gap. But there's other feed gaps you can target. A big one we found as well is if you're grazing like now and for the next month, you can actually save grazing for your dedicated pasture-only paddocks, and they put on more biomass, and you get more grazing later on, and that has a big component. In the booklet we talked about, there is some just examples of what to expect in terms of grazing days. I reckon in the Mallee, Nick, you can get 500 to 1,000 grazing days out of a shrub pasture system. Again, that's pretty valuable at this time of year when you don't have much other feed.
Is that per unit area, per hectare, or what is that?
So a grazing day?
Yeah.
Yep.
Forgive my ignorance, Jason. Sorry.
Yeah. So look, a grazing day. So, oh well, I might as well read the example on the screen. That's easy for everybody. 100 grazing days is enough feed for one animal for 100 days, for example. Or 10 animals for 10 days, or 100 animals for 1 day, for example.
And that's on a per hectare basis.
Yeah. So, yeah, it can be, very, very valuable particularly when you think about when that feed could be available. I think that's something not to be underestimated. When you don't have many other options, everything's dry, stubbles will run out, for example. Yep. Very valuable feed source. So shrub pasture mixes are part of the farm feed base, and they should be viewed in that context. They contribute to the part of the feed base. Look, as we talked about, can be out of season feed, can be a more predictable feed supply, and some of the things we didn't talk about. They provide shade and shelter for livestock, and a lot of NRM benefits that we haven't even spoke about. That's fixing a mallee seep or just getting ground cover, biodiversity as well. I think. Do you want to?
Yeah, we're going to have a talk available online about some of the biodiversity benefits.
Yeah, that's great, and they're definitely there, and that'll come out in that talk. Look, I think there's an old saying, there's a paradigm, especially with old man saltbush, that they won't fatten livestock, but it keeps them alive. I think you can move beyond that, but it requires doing a few different things. Use mixtures, forage mixtures, and that includes pasture. Pasture is really important, but the animals have to graze all that together to get that benefit. And so experienced livestock, really important, high stocking rates. But yep, the shrubs are not pastures, and so they need good rest periods between grazing.
Yeah.
It's been a whirlwind talk, a lot of info that I haven't covered as well. And so, look, if you're keen and you want to know more, I think this booklet, is a really good resource, and it's very practical. Just guides you through the journey in terms of establishing, choosing species, right through to grazing management and what to expect.
Well, I'm almost lost for words, Jason. I think that was a fantastic overview of this field, and I am even more enthusiastic about these diverse plantings than I was before seeing this talk today. As you know, I've been going around the countryside interviewing a couple of forage shrub champions over the last month. I've seen one bloke who was able to keep his stock for an extra couple of years during the recent drought and then sell them after the price of cattle shot up. So that was a really compelling use case from where I sit. That same guy, Lambsy's used down twice a year in his system. I don't know if that's probably not going to be for everyone, but it's quite interesting that his lambing ewes and lactating ewes go into his shrub planting. I've seen a fella who's brought salt land back into production, and he's actually remediated it. So he had a salt scald patch where nothing would grow anyway, that is now growing pasture in between shrub plantings. So that's great. And I've met a bloke, John Arentz, who says that he wouldn't even run sheep if he didn't have them because he couldn't deal with all the supplementary feeding, and he can't keep cover on his sandhills if he doesn't have a place to put the stock at certain times of year. Now, in your experience, can you just reiterate what times of year people tend to use their shrubs as a place to park their stock?
Oh, look, the classic one is now. So dealing with that autumn feed gap is a really big one, but that don't have to be confined to that. I think another really good use that I found a lot, particularly in the Mallee, is just that time leading up to reaping.
Yes.
So, your pastures are dried out or you spray top them and you've got that flat spot in terms of feed supply just before you get onto stubbles.
Yes.
And while you start reaping and you're too busy, I think they're a really good time to, use these systems in that little window.
Yes, that's what John was saying. He does not want his stock bearing out his browned out legume pastures while he's reaping, so he pops it in the shrubs. We've had a question come through from a listener just asking what the key take-homes are on how we ensure longevity from perennial shrubs. Since the Enrich project, we've had the really crook years of 17 through 19. Have you got any any advice on how we keep those diverse and perhaps less hardy shrubs alive during dry spells?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily just dry spells. So I think establishment is absolutely critical. I think you see a lot of problems there. They just don't probably pay enough attention to the three P's. Preparation, preparation, preparation.
Yes.
So weed control is really, really important. And then, yeah, grazing management. So really allowing that rest time and recovery for all those shrubs and protecting that regrowth. So that's, I think, a problem that we run into a lot. Just falling back into that sort of set stocking regime, and animals just picking their eyes out of the mix
Yeah, I imagine if you take their
continually.
eye off the ball and leave them in for an extra 5 days or something, that might hammer a couple of the more tender species, I suppose.
Yeah, it's not the 5 days like we showed in some of those photos. You can really defoliate these things once, but it's that regrowth. It's more like leaving them in there for 2 months or going back in after 3 months. That's that's where you run into problems.
So, I'm convinced as to the value of the diverse shrub approach, but I'm not seeing a lot of them out there in farmer land yet. What do you think are the main blockages to having them out there planted and surviving and contributing?
Yeah, look, it's part of the let's call it the value chain, if you like. So you need suppliers of these shrubs,
Oh, yes.
um, and obviously they need a market as well to supply into. So there's just that teething problem with some of these newer species is just
Yes.
getting suppliers on board um, that want to supply some of these plants, and they can do it, but they need a bit of lead time, and that's something else that the booklet talks about in terms of preparation.
Yeah. Well, if
You
you
need to
can't get
put
the seed,
yeah,
yeah.
you need to put orders in quite early. Like you can't just come up now in April and go, I want to plant a paddock of forage shrubs. Needs to yeah need to start those thoughts the year before.
We've had someone message and just ask what were the winning combinations of shrub that came out of Enrich. I don't think we've covered today which species would go in an optimal mix.
No, so it depends a little bit on your soil type, and that's what the booklet sort of steps through
Yes.
quite a lot. Um, it is. There are some very common species in there that goes across a whole range of different soil types, but it does vary a little bit.
Well, I've
But
seen that the Mallee CMA's got 3 demo sites that they've re-established in the last 18 months as part of this project. And we've gone for ruby saltbush, Eremophila, old man saltbush, and I'm not sure what the other one is. Is it Mallee saltbush or is it Rhagodia?
yeah, the same thing, just
Okay, same
the
thing.
old common name story, Nick.
Yes.
Mallee saltbush or Rhagodia. So they're all very hardy species, and they all bring something a little bit different to the diet of livestock.
And just one final question on the chat is to do with the process of preparation for shrubs. I mean, I suppose if you've had a wet autumn, there'd be a temptation to just do a knockdown and bung them in. Alternatively, if you've got a long lead in time, you'd probably want to do a knockdown the year before and get a double knock on the site. What do you think?
Yeah, I think a little bit like when you're going out of a pasture phase into a crop. And so you're thinking about that the year before, you need to think about it in a similar way. So, yeah, control weeds the year before. I really recommend deep ripping um,
Yes.
at least a few months before you absolutely plant. And it doesn't matter if it's on a sand. I really think you get a lot of advantages from deep ripping.
Yes.
And then concentrate your weed control along that rip line and try and preserve your pasture in between the rows, but concentrate your weed control. Yeah, if you try and get a double knockdown, Nick, that's sensible.
Have you
Yeah.
seen, how do people, does anyone ever do in-crop weed control where they use a hooded sprayer or something? Like what happens if you get a heap of weeds competing with your shrubs 6 months in?
Yeah, so you can use shielded sprayers. We use shielded sprayers a lot, but that's more in a research setting.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You just have to be a bit careful in terms of over the top stuff, in terms of always be mindful of what's registered. And obviously there's not there's not a lot when you're talking about some of these species as well in terms of over the top herbicides. So that's
Yes.
why preparation is really, really critical.
All right. Well, that's it for questions from me and from the listeners. It's just for me to thank you so much for a fantastic presentation. Some of the material I referred to there about interviews with some forage shrub champions, they're going to be released as podcasts. So we'll have them on the website alongside this talk, and alongside one also from Stuart Collard on the biodiversity aspect. Jason's been helping us put together an online version of the decision tree, and we're really looking forward to bringing that to you from our website, from a forage shrubs page within our website. Thanks so much for helping us out with this project, Jason, and spreading the word, and thanks for a fantastic presentation.
No, thanks, Nick. Thanks for the opportunity. And yeah, try and have a look at those resources if you are interested in more.
Yes. And just finally, we'll be having another couple of field days as part of this project. So look out for those as well in late May. Details to be finalised. Thanks very much. See you later, everyone.